I'm Elizabeth Ray.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And Tom Cruise is Captain Nathan Algren in The Last Samurai.
You know, the problem with Hollywood is that every single movie is the same, right? It's just buff dudes in elaborate costumes just punching problems until they go away in this fantastical, semi-magical setting. Everything is overblown and it's big budget and it's drenched in special effects. And I know that it's only a couple of days after April 1st. But here's the twist. I'm not talking about superhero movies. I am talking about the epic historical film of the 2000s. Just another thing that we can blame on Ridley Scott.
Yeah, I kind of like them, though. I love the big period dramas and the epics. And although the boy ones aren't as good for me as, you know, the sweeping epics of a more feminine nature, I still enjoy them. And everybody loved Gladiator, right?
I consider this to be such a masculine subgenre. I'm so interested in... What do you consider to be the more feminine historical epics?
Anna and the King of Siam or Anna and the King.
Sure,
I don't remember what they called
The King
it.
and I. Yeah.
The King and I. It's had all these different versions. So, yes.
Like your Anna Karenina. And I guess to a certain extent, you know, the big budget Little Women, Pride and Prejudice, you know,
those
historical
kinds of things.
literary
They're not
adaptations.
Really historical, but yeah, period dramas, I guess, is what I'm thinking of.
No, that's interesting. I hadn't put those two things on the same continuum, but you're right. They are very similar and certainly have a shared aesthetic sense, at least at rest. They have a shared aesthetic sense.
Yes, definitely.
I think that we can trace the evolution of the masculine historical epic of the 2000s, which really was an explosive subgenre that has now all but disappeared, particularly if you look at the success of Napoleon from last year.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Ooh, things are not as they once were. But I think that you can trace the evolution of this subgenre through three very specific films, right? Through Dances with Wolves in 1990, The Last of the Mohicans in 92, and the very surprising success of Braveheart in 1995.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Those three films absolutely get you to Ridley Scott's Gladiator in the year 2000. And then we spend a full decade, just chasing that success again. Ridley Scott tries to do it twice more with very limited success.
Yeah.
But what's amazing is that these films all come in at around the same budget, with a couple of exceptions. They all come in at around the same budget, and they all make around the same amount of money. It really is the superhero movie before the superhero movie.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I've prepared for you a quiz. I've prepared for you a little game. We're going to move through all of the heavy hitters in the category of the 2000s.
Oh, man. Okay.
I'm going to start by giving you the directors, and then I'll give you the stars. And all you have to do is tell me which film I'm talking about, which of these largely interchangeable films we're talking about.
I'll try.
The first one is a bit of a cheat because it comes out only a month after Gladiator, so the degree to which it is influenced by Ridley Scott's film is perhaps less than the other films in this category. It certainly picks a somewhat unique setting. This is directed by Roland Emmerich, who you know, of course, from Stargate and Independence Day and Godzilla.
Yeah, okay.
It stars Jason Isaacs, Heath Ledger, and Mel Gibson.
Oh, yes. This is The Patriot.
The Patriot.
Yes.
Absolutely correct. $110 million budget, made $215 million at the box office. And the other statistic that we're going to track for all of these films, of course, is their overblown running time. The Patriot.
Yeah.
The Patriot.
Yeah.
165 minutes.
Yeah.
The second film on our list, I think, has a subject matter that is much closer to your heart. And frankly, it's a film that I'm surprised you don't watch all of the time. It's directed by Peter Weir, Dead Poets Society and Witness and The Truman Show. It stars James D'Arcy, who is, of course, the Agent Carter version of Edmund Jarvis. It stars Paul Bettany, who is the other version of Jarvis. And it stars, in not his only appearance on this list, Gladiator aside, he's going to show up a couple more times, Mr. Russell Crowe, the face of the 2000s historical epic.
Yes. Ooh, can you give me a little bit more? Can you give me like
They're on a boat.
They're on a boat. That's a great. Oh, yes, I do love this movie. Yes, this is Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. Bonus points for getting the full title. Master and Commander, a budget of $150 million, a box office take of $212, a running time, a svelte 138 minutes.
Wow.
Positively petite by the standards of the company that it's keeping.
That's
right
a great
here.
film. I really like that one.
From there, we're going to skip ahead to a real epic and a real miss, I think, honestly, in terms of quality at least, if not in terms of box office. In 2004, director Wolfgang Peterson, who directed previously The Neverending Story and Air Force One and The Perfect Storm, he somehow managed to corral the once-in-a-generation talents of Eric Bana, Orlando Bloom, and Brad Pitt for which film?
This is Troy.
This is Troy.
Yeah.
Absolutely, this is Troy. $185 million budget, 497 at the box office. Just a good old-fashioned $500 million property.
Wow.
Runs 163 minutes.
Not very good, I think.
Not very good. No, not very good at all. And certainly not as good as that cast would suggest.
Right.
I think it's a wild misuse of Brad Pitt.
Yep.
Orlando Bloom is going to show up a couple times in this list too, and we will be reminded that his talent is perhaps more limited than we would have thought.
Eric Bana, I think, was good, though. I feel like I liked him. He was my guy in that movie.
I remember Eric Bana being good.
Yeah.
I'm always a little curious as to why Eric Bana never really
just didn't
happened.
pop off. Yeah.
This is when we're really in the glut, because there are 3 of these films in 2004. The second of these films, well, it's directed by Antoine Fuqua, who did The Replacement Killers and Training Day and Olympus Has Fallen. It is a much more action-oriented film. It stars Stellan Skarsgård, Keira Knightley, and Clive Owen. And if you're not going to get one of these films, I think it's probably going to be this one.
I know this one. This is, I think, is it called Guinevere?
It's not. It's called by the other character in the film.
Okay. Is it called Arthur?
King Arthur.
Yes. King Arthur, Guinevere. But this is the one where she's like in the weird bandage outfit running into battle. That was such a weird choice. So odd.
Budget of $120 million, took 203 at the box office. So you can see here we're already getting into this pattern of you're spending a huge amount of money and you're making a slightly larger amount of money.
Yeah.
None of these, well, I guess with the exception of Troy, which really does exceed expectations. King Arthur, alongside the others, is kind of making an expected amount of money. King Arthur, 142 minutes, like really not so bad at all. From there, though, running times are going to inflate a little bit. The last of the 3 films in 2004 is directed by Oliver Stone, who we have discussed previously, of course, in our episode on Born on the 4th of July. This film stars, in dubious quotes, Jared Leto, Val Kilmer, Angelina Jolie, and Colin Farrell.
Damn, this is another one of those, like, Greek ones.
It is. It's the definitive Greek one, you might argue.
Oh, no. You're going to put me on the spot.
Some might describe it as great. Some might describe him as great.
Alexander.
No one's going to describe this film as great. $155 million budget, took $167 million, is reportedly a $100 million write-down when you fold in all of the marketing costs for that film. 175 minutes. So long.
That's so long.
So long to be looking at Colin Farrell with bleached hair. It's a very weird, very bad film, honestly.
Terrible.
From there, we move into 2005. We're back with Ridley Scott. He's trying to recreate the magic. He's trying to do what he did before. And this time, he's using David Thewlis, Jeremy Irons, Ava Green, and in the lead, unfortunately, Orlando Bloom.
Kingdom of Heaven.
Kingdom of Heaven, $130 million budget, $218 million at the box office. This, I think, is our longest, 194 minutes.
That's so long.
That's a whole day.
I feel like, wasn't there like a theatrical release that was shorter and then the long version?
There were numerous releases of Kingdom of Heaven. Ridley Scott, of course, loves to fiddle with his own work.
Yes.
So there are numerous releases. I have heard that the super expanded 194-minute version is actually kind of good. But
I think that's
honestly, I'm
right.
never going to go back and watch it.
You need the other stuff. I think that's the only one that I've seen.
That's the only cut that you've seen?
Yes, I think so, because I remember having watched it, and then the person I was watching it with was like, okay, now when they released it, they didn't have this, the entire character of the kid was like completely cut. And I was like, then what the hell was the movie about?
Yeah.
And they were like, exactly.
Exactly. From there, we have a huge runaway success, and really we're closing the door on the Ridley Scott version of this kind of historical epic, because we're going to do something that is much more cartoonish, something that is much more comic booky, something that absolutely paves the way for the superhero revolution.
Sure.
In 2006, director Zack Snyder of Watchmen and Justice League and Rebel Moon, that movie that everybody cares about so much, directs Dominic West, Lena Headey, and Gerard Butler in
300.
300, of course.
This was a gift to women because there for a while, every Halloween, you would see like 30 or 40 frat guys in full Sparta gear, and you're just like, okay, hey,
sure.
Hi.
The budget on that film, believe it or not, is $60 million. Like a very small budget compared to these other films. It's got a much smaller cast too, and we're relying on so much CGI and post-processing in that film. It's got a real style to it.
It does.
It takes $456 million worldwide. It is another almost $500 million property, and a running time of 117 minutes. It really marks the transition from these super overblown epics to this distillation of what the public wanted, which is, it turns out, Gerard Butler mostly naked.
Who doesn't want that?
Good in that film, right? It's been a long time since I've seen it.
Lena Headey's good in it too.
Well, Lena Headey is good in everything, so I give her much more extension. But I remember Gerard Butler being good in that film, despite the fact that he has demonstrably not been good in anything else that he's ever made. Is there another Gerard Butler film that is anything at all?
Good question. Yeah,
I've never seen it. Listeners, get in touch. Let me know if I'm missing out on some high-quality Gerard Butler work. We're going to close out with one more film from the year 2010, cutting ahead 4 years, right? We are now in a post-Iron Man world, and Ridley Scott is back at it again. He's directing William Hurt and Cate Blanchett and Russell Crowe.
Ooh. Can you give me more about where we are in history?
We are in England. He is going grimier and darker and more like low fantasy, right? Yeah. He's giving us something that is a little edgier. This isn't your grandfather's version of this character?
This is the Robin Hood one.
This is the Robin Hood one.
Okay, because there was one. Okay,
yes, there was a Robin Hood. A budget of something like 200 million, although numbers vary wildly across the internet on this particular film. Takes 322 million at the box office, is a respectable draw even at that time, runs 140 minutes. And that's kind of it. We will see occasionally these historical epics come back, but nothing has kickstarted this genre again.
Yeah.
It'll happen. It'll happen. 20 years from now, we're going to have another run of these, just as we had a run of these in the 60s and the 70s. You know, the entire industry is cyclical. It will come back around. Discussing these films and going into this kind of depth, what is it that you love most about the historical epic?
I guess I just love the grandeur. Like, they're just very big. I mean, it's an epic. Like, there's a sweeping score. There are great costumes. The cinematography is usually pretty awesome. There's some kind of style going on. I love costumes and production design. So those are always really interesting in these big films. Where I check out is like the big battle sequences and stuff.
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
I want to say one of these movies, it might have been the King Arthur one. What was the one that had like elephants and trebuchets going into battle, and it was completely insane?
I think that could have been the King Arthur one.
I think that might have
Was
been
also
King
the
Arthur.
Robin Hood one?
I'm not really sure. But anyway.
We've talked a lot about your love of this subgenre. I'm going to just drop in here to say I don't love this subgenre.
You don't like it?
This is not really my kind of thing at all. Because it's neither fish nor fowl, right? We're treating the historical record with such a casual disregard that we're basically making fantasy films with some proper names taken from the real world. So I'm disinterested in that as a creative exercise, because if you're going to make a fantasy film, make a fantasy film.
Yeah,
you guys, like, that's
yeah.
okay. You can do that. And if you're going to make something that is more historically accurate, then do that. That I think is a much more interesting landscape to enter into. But obviously, yes, also a much more complex one and also a much more challenging one. And those films are oftentimes less immediately engaging.
How do you feel about like the classic versions, Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia, things like that?
Well, Lawrence of Arabia, I think, is an all-time classic. I think
agree.
that is an unimpeachable film.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben-Hur, Spartacus, I can't really ever get engaged in. The Swords and Sandals version of this is my least favorite version of this, right? I think that there are much more interesting things that you can do in different periods of history than there are in this Hollywoodized version of ancient Rome. I just think that we've kind of done that story over and over. Although, as I'm saying this, today it's just been announced that there's going to be a brand new re-release of Caligula, the famously excessive movie in actual movie theaters. So that's going to be an interesting thing to see. But yeah, I think that you can do more interesting things than just have very buff dudes with American accents kind of gesturing toward each other and making speeches.
Sure. What do you think then of like the smaller versions that are these historical epics, but without the battles? So maybe not an epic, these historical dramas without the battles, like Elizabeth or...
Yeah. See, I think it's so interesting that you pulled that out there, because to me, the epic is not necessarily about the scale of what you see on screen as much as it's about this melodramatic mode. I think
so too.
The melodramatic modality of these stories, which... all of these are really primarily melodramas, right? Because we're just dealing with the largest and most heightened emotions. They are archetypal in their way. There's nothing about that turns me off. It really is just the reductive, and now we're going to have some people in sand. We're going to do a gladiator fight. We're going to do, maybe we'll try and do a chariot scene because as a nod to Ben-Hur. None of that really matters. The politics are never as fully developed, as smart, as real life politics are, as complex and as compromised as real life politics were at the time. So yeah, this is not my favorite genre, but you can't deny, I think, the visual appeal of seeing something this sumptuous on a big screen. There is a strong argument, I think, that this is kind of what cinema is for. And if you look back at the history of Hollywood, you can see that rise again and again and again. And I'm really not kidding, right? By 2030, we're going to have the next one of these. We're going to be back into this mode.
Exciting.
Napoleon could have done it if Napoleon were a better movie.
I mean, I haven't seen it. I'm not interested in it.
The response was a resounding shrug.
Yeah. Too bad.
And sometimes that is just a product of where the industry is, right? Genre taste does matter. in how audiences and critics too, though they will deny it, and critics too, how they respond to films. And sometimes if you're just making something that isn't in the zeitgeist, if you're making something that isn't popular right now, it's going to be disregarded. And then 10 years from now will be picked up and hailed as an early success of the genre, right? We'll circle back around to all of these. But yeah, it was a fun time. It was fun to, I guess, have that much money spent on costumes and makeup and lavish set construction. And it's interesting, too, to think about doing that in the 2000s when we didn't have completely free access to infinite CGI the way that we do now.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
There's, perhaps it's the last swing of like that old school, actual physical, constructive kind of Hollywood. And it's good that they went out on such a high before we moved to doing everything in a gray box.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all that said, then, let's get into our actually relatively early example of this subgenre, right? Because The Last Samurai is 2003, so it's happening before we even get that huge glut of epics in the summer of 2004. Let's talk a little about The Last Samurai, and I have the trailer game.
I was going to say, let's start.
From the people who brought you your favorite character-driven TV dramas of the 90s. Captain Nathan Algren is content, drinking away his future as a penance for his past, until he is captured by samurai in the forests of 19th century Japan. Lawrence of Aravatar meets Dances with the Last of the Mohicans meets Dune. In Tom Cruise's surprisingly not very racist The Last Samurai.
Best work yet. So
Thank
good.
you. The hard part's going to be finding appropriate music. So let's do a brief history of history. Let's do a brief history of Japan in this period, up to the era in which the movie is set, because we really need this information to make a considered politicized reading of this film, and the film doesn't want you to have it.
The film doesn't give it to me, and since I don't know, I've been waiting for this part where you explain, okay, so why did who want what?
So this starts in the early 17th century, right? Between 1633 and 1639, under enormous pressure from the Spanish and the Portuguese, from their colonial forces and from their religious presence in the area, the Tokugawa shogun decrees by law that Japan will be a sealed country, that no Japanese person will be allowed to leave Japan, that no foreign person will be allowed to enter Japan, that trade and contact will be severely limited and curtailed. Japan is at this point a locked country. This is the Sakoku period, right? Which means locked country.
Wow.
For 200 years, Japan is isolated. Then, in 1853, a U.S. Navy fleet of 4 warships arrives in Japanese coastal waters. They are asked by the locals to go to Nagasaki, the only place where diplomatic contact with foreign nationals takes place, and they decline. They tell the Japanese people that they will proceed instead to the capital city of Edo and burn it to the ground unless the Japanese end this period of isolationism and begin to trade with the rest of the world, specifically, of course, with America. Under the command of U.S. Navy Commodore Matthew Perry, which is a strange thing. The fleet applies sufficient pressure that the Japanese relent and sign the Convention of Kanagawa, a treaty which opens several Japanese ports to U.S. shipping. It ensures the safety of American citizens if they should find themselves on Japanese soil, and it establishes a diplomatic consul. This treaty leads, of course, to many more with the U.S. and with other world powers, and the Sakoku period, as of that point, is over. We should take a moment to emphasize how brutal and assertive this use of U.S. military force is. They breach this country's isolationist policy and demand that it enters the modern world. So that is the background to where we are coming in The Last Samurai. Not everybody is happy about this change within Japan, though, including the samurai. It is difficult, I think, without taking the next half hour to really break down like the political structures of the time. It is kind of difficult to think about who the samurai are and what they represented in Japan. But you know, the easy shortcut, and if anyone at home knows about this stuff for sure, I know they'll be appalled that I'm even making this comparison, but the easy shortcut is medieval knights, right? They are the armed military wing of the nobility, in effect.
Okay.
Which you would never get from watching this film.
A little bit, but yeah. Only because Katsumoto was always so clear in saying this sword serves the emperor.
Yes.
So,
yes,
okay.
in exactly the same way, though, as, knights of the chivalric period
Right.
would have served
Their
king
yeah.
at the expense of any other consideration. That kind of connection works. That sense of chivalry, of nobility, kind of matches the
Right.
samurai sense of honor. So yeah, there are transferable virtues there, and you can certainly understand it as being a similar place in society. They decide that this opening up to modernity of Japan is a bad thing. This was the end to their way of life, right? They cannot persist as a privileged social class within a modern Japan, so they start fighting back. In 1868, the samurai rise in rebellion against the shogun, and they restore the Emperor of Japan, who was previously a figurehead, to political primacy. He immediately deconstructs what was the political infrastructure of Japan at that time. This is the Emperor Meiji. This is the Meiji Restoration. This is this historical period in Japan. This is the same guy that we see in the film, of course.
He's aged very well then.
Thank you. See, we're interrupting the history with a little bit of levity. That's what you get.
That's my job.
Here on The Last Star in Hollywood. So he consolidates all political power. He starts to systematically strip a lot of people of their power, but also the samurai of their position, right? We're also moving to an era of oligarchy. That is what Amura represents in the film, right? This modern wealthy oligarchy.
Okay.
So it's a period of huge and God, frankly, unprecedented transformation. I don't think that there's a similar period of political and social transformation in any country's history that I can think of that happens in such a condensed time frame with such incredible political pressure from outside too. Everybody wants to sign up Japan as their preferred trading ally in the region. So that is where we come into the film, right? The emperor is back in power. All of Japan is being transformed. It's opening up new opportunities in the US, and we'll see where we go from there. And we'll talk about the political reality of what is actually happening in the film a little later, I think, in the episode.
Okay.
Does that set your landscape appropriately? Do you have a sense of where we are now?
No, that does help. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I was able to glean probably most of that from watching the movie, but I did have to lean in and pay attention for sure.
The really troubling part is the real gunboat diplomacy from the U.S. Navy, just showing up and saying, no.
Yeah. That's really striking.
Yeah. The story of the film, though, begins with Radar Pictures producer Scott Krupp, who produced movies including Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey and Jumanji and Mr. Holland's Opus and Runaway Bride. Wow. He is fascinated with post-Sakoku Japan and apparently has an idea to make a film about the first ever Japanese cattle drive. He hires a couple of different people to write drafts of the script, but they don't hang together and they can't find the story. He hires a guy called Vincent Ward, who has a story credit on David Fincher's Alien 3 and has directed a handful of movies through the 80s and the 90s. Ward thinks that the cowboy angle is a bad idea. He thinks that it won't work and changes it instead to the story of a Civil War veteran, an American Civil War veteran, traveling to Japan. They just can't break the story. They just can't find it, and eventually they head off for other projects. But the idea persists, and it's eventually picked up by director Edward Zwick, who hires successful playwright and screenwriter John Logan, who is fresh from his co-writing Academy Award win for Ridley Scott's Gladiator, to develop the idea. So I want to flash back and give a little background on Zwick, who is a really interesting figure, I think, in the industry. He's born in Chicago in 52. He graduates Harvard in 74, then attends the AFI Conservatory, graduating with his master's in 75. He works a little in TV through the 80s, and then he directs About Last Night with Rob Lowe and Demi Moore in 1986. Did you ever see About Last Night?
I never saw it, but I've heard of it.
Of those Brat Pack movies?
Yeah.
That is maybe I think St. Elmo's is the best. St. Elmo's Fire is probably the best one of those, but I think that About Last Night is a really interesting one, and it's an interesting performance from Demi Moore, too. He then teams up with producer Marshall Herskovitz to form the Bedford Falls Company, which is a very cute name.
Love that.
And they start pitching TV shows. Their first success is 30-something, which runs from 87 to 91 and absolutely shapes a generation, as well as pushing the needle on serialized television formats. If Moonlighting had not been the show that Moonlighting was, we would be talking about 30-something the way that we talk about Moonlighting
okay.
now. 30-something not as good as Moonlighting, to be very, very clear, but still a very important show. From there, they develop and executively produce a little show called My So-Called Life.
Love that one.
A little show called Once and Again from 1999 to 2002 that I will absolutely never talk about on a podcast. In 2016, they also produce the glossy nonsense that is Nashville, a show that
Oh,
you watched
yeah.
at least a
I
season
watched
of,
a
right?
lot of it, but then eventually just completely fell off and never went back.
That's Connie Britton, Hayden Panettiere, and like 6 guys who all look exactly the same.
Yes. Uh-huh. Totally.
At the same time as they're making some excellent TV, though, they're also producing and directing movies. Their big break is Legends of the Fall in 1994.
Ooh.
Then they do Courage Under Fire in 96. The Bedford Falls Company, though neither Zwick nor Herskovitz personally, but the Bedford Falls Company as an institution also makes Shakespeare in Love in 1998.
Damn.
And Steven Soderbergh's very bad but inexplicably award-winning Traffic in
Oh,
the year
yeah.
2000.
Sure.
The upshot is that Zwick and Herskovitz and the Bedford Falls Company are quietly producing these dramas that are a degree or two better than they ought to be, a degree or two more intelligent, a degree or two more thoughtful, a degree or two more compassionate about their characters. I think that's a real hallmark of their work. So there's no big explosive behind-the-scenes shenanigans story attached to this film. It's just very quietly competent in terms of its production. Logan develops a really great script that immediately gets a lot of attention and gets very early attention from Cruise. I'm not entirely certain why Tom Cruise would take this film, except for the success of Dances with Wolves and The Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Looking
Tom
for that
Cruise...
Oscar.
Was exactly going to be my
Yeah,
question. Yes.
yeah.
That's it, right?
I think so.
It's such an Oscar baity role, particularly at this time.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that also it seems to me that he just genuinely likes to do different things, or did for a while. Like, I wonder if that's one of the reasons why he's making this move to Warner Brothers, is to do more than just the Mission Impossible movies. I wonder if he's wanting to step out a little bit again.
Do you mean his move now to Warner Brothers?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because this was also a move to Warner Brothers.
Oh, hilarious. No, I meant, in the present day.
Yes.
The move to Warner Brothers to give him the opportunity to do more of a variety of movie.
I think, yeah. I have no idea. We'll see, I guess, depending on what he
Yeah.
does next. We'll get a sense of where he was. But certainly, I think, following the split with Kidman, following her Oscar win for The Hours, this is going to look very attractive to someone
Yeah.
who is maybe chasing some statuary.
Can I just ask you straight out, do you think that he fits well in this mode, in this kind of like period drama?
Yes.
Yeah?
I
Okay.
think, well, it's a qualified yes, right? Because it's not a very cruisy performance. He
No.
doesn't run in this film, which is
I
frankly
know.
wild.
Isn't that baffling?
Yeah.
Especially because there's a moment where he does like run off screen and they could follow him, but the camera doesn't. I'm like, ooh.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Now,
Weird.
you know, we talked a couple of times on this podcast about the path not taken with Cruise.
yeah.
That if he hadn't been such an immediate success, maybe we would have got more interesting work from him. Maybe he would have turned into, I think, a really interesting character actor. And this, for all that he is undeniably a leading man in
Yeah.
this film, it is more of a character actor performance. It is less the Tom Cruise
Yes.
movie persona
Yes.
than we've
agreed.
seen in years and years and years. Like Magnolia aside, where he's almost leveraging his Tom Cruise
Right.
persona in the pursuit of that role. It's self-conscious and it's
Yes.
self-reflective. When was the last time that Cruise even almost disappeared into a role?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think back to his Vampire Lestat. That
True.
was very
True.
unusual.
Yeah, that's a similar kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, obviously there's a little DNA of that movie here. There's a little DNA of Far and Away, certainly
Sure.
here. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard not to be
All the
conscious
horses,
of those.
yeah.
Though I think that I'll say this now. I'll anticipate our discussion at the end of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a better film than either Far and Away or Interview with the Vampire.
I think that's fair. Absolutely.
How does he work for you in this film?
He does read too modern to me. I think he's good. I think he's doing good work. And I agree that he is much less cruisy, that he does kind of disappear into this. But I just don't think the material serves him very well, especially when he's like very curmudgeon-y in the beginning. By the
Sure.
end, I like him quite a
Sure.
lot. But for the whole first half of the film, I'm just kind of questioning the casting.
I don't know. I find him really interesting in that period. I find him less interesting as he moves into a more traditional leading man heroic performance toward
Okay.
the end of the film. I guess
Interesting.
I find it harder to track some of his internal emotional state changes. I'm not entirely sure why he makes some of the choices, and the film honestly seems unsure why he makes some of the choices that he
Yeah.
makes, except that this 19th century guy has apparently seen Dances with Wolves and knows how these stories play out. It feels
Yeah,
in
that's
some of its
interesting.
movements a little obligatory. You know, we talk a lot about how much I love, in particular, Tom Cruise on the back foot.
Yes.
Right? I love, he's the guy, he's someone is saying no to him, even though he's right and better at everything than everyone. And what I love about this film is people are saying no to him and he's actually kind of a screw up. He's
Yes.
actually kind of a mess. He's brilliant and brave, but there's something self-destructive in that.
Absolutely.
In a way that self-destructive impulse can be informed in things like Top Gun, for example, in things like Cocktail, for example. Instead, here we get something that is bitter, I think. And we get more of a redemption story emotionally because he's willing to put himself at a lower tier at the beginning of the film. I find that opening address, and we'll get to the rest of the cast in just a moment, but I find that opening address where he's pitching the rifle and being caught up in his memory as he is giving this, I think, very good drunk performance.
Yes.
I think that scene is fantastic. I think that scene is brilliant. And I think that he, for all of his modernity, which perhaps works better when we're in Japan, where he is like iconic of modernity in that way.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
I think there's something really interesting happening in this film. As you can tell, I think I'm really positive on this film, and I think that you are too, right?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I am ultimately. I am, a little bit lost for the whole the romance of writing straight into your death doesn't work for me, and a lot of the movie is that. So that leaves me a little bit cold, but much of the film I really enjoyed. Yeah.
Let's talk about what I'm sure I can say this with complete confidence. Let's talk about what our favorite part of the film is. Let's talk about Mr. Ken Watanabe.
Oh my God. Just extraordinary.
A legend. This is his
really
first
incredible work.
English language film, first performance in English. He's born in Japan in 1959. He has a very successful career on stage and in film in Japan till he breaks internationally with this movie. He's just impossibly magnetic on screen.
Yeah.
He is incredible. He can hold the camera. He is masterful in the dialogue. He's masterful in the action sequences. I think this is one of the best performances that I have ever seen.
I completely agree. Just what he does with his eyes alone.
Yeah.
But also, you're right. The language, he has an incredible facility with it. It's a very poetic figure.
Yeah.
And he's just wonderful.
Dignity.
Yes.
Such dignity. And we'll see that again in movies. He's in Memoirs of a Geisha alongside Zhang Ji and Michelle Yeoh. He's in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, which is, a really fun bit of misdirection there. He's in Letters from Iwo Jima. He's unbelievably good in Nolan's Inception, I think.
Yes.
Just fantastic in that. He's taken paychecks for various Transformers movies and various Godzilla movies. Why not pay the guy who has more gravitas than any other person on Earth to come in and say 3 very portentous lines about what the big lizard is about to do? Or the big robot. Sometimes it's the big robot.
Sure.
You can never know for
Once
sure.
it was a Pokemon, I think.
He is so brilliant in Detective Pikachu. Detective Pikachu, you guys, the world slept on it a little bit. It is a genuinely very good film. It is
love you so much.
Maybe Ryan Reynolds' best performance. The young cast is stacked. They are so good and so talented and so open. The CGI effects are brilliant. Chris Gere from You're the Worst,
which we love,
gets an excellent paycheck and a really nice character turn in that film. And all of it is anchored in Ken Watanabe's performance as the police chief. He is just brilliant. And I would strongly recommend that movie. If you don't think that you like Pokemon, and you probably don't, if you don't think that you like Pokemon, still watch Detective Pikachu. It is much less a Pokemon movie than it is just a weird science fiction fantasy movie.
Yeah.
There's a version of that film where it's not Pokemon and it's all just like Jim Henson Muppets. And it's exactly the same movie, except it would feel much, much stranger. But a really dense and well-crafted piece of work.
Okay.
And Ken Watanabe's a legend. I absolutely love him. I'm going to jump ahead. In fact, this film gets directed for 4 Academy Awards for Best Sound Mixing, Best Costume Design, of course,
naturally,
Best Art Direction, and Best Supporting Actor for Ken Watanabe. I'm going to read that category for you because this is some nonsense right here. Ken Watanabe in The Last Samurai, Jimon Hansu in America, Benicio del Toro in 21 Grams, Alec Baldwin in The Cooler, and the winner is Tim Robbins in Mystic River. So not only is Ken Watanabe by far the best performance out of that category, not only did he so much deserve his Oscar for this role, as I said, I think this is one of my favorite performances of all time. Like I'm struggling looking back through the Cruise filmography to think of a supporting performance that I have liked as much. And it's nothing is coming to me right now. Maybe something will emerge.
No one's really called upon to do as much as Ken Watanabe is here, so it's really hard to compare.
Yeah,
because of course we loved Renee Zellweger and Jerry Maguire, and even Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire, but they were doing very different things. Exactly, like you can't.
Philip Seymour Hoffman in Magnolia.
Yes,
you kind of have to mention.
That's closer to a comparison, I would say.
You have to mention Dustin Hoffman for Rain Man.
Yeah.
But is there anyone else who's maybe Gene Hackman for The Firm, who is so good and malevolent and complex? But even then, like nothing like
Newman,
this quality.
Yeah, agreed. I was moved.
The second of our supporting characters is Mr. Timothy Spall. Timothy Leonard Spall. Just exactly like Ken Watanabe in a lot of ways.
Hilarious. I don't usually care for him, but I thought he was lovely in this.
That's because I think you have come to know him through his later era work in which he plays slimy little villains.
Yes.
Yeah, he plays Peter Pettigrew in a number of different ways, right? Mm-hmm. This is much closer to one of the things that Spall could do earlier in his career. He's born in 1957. He makes his career in the theatre. He trains at the National Youth Theatre and then at RADA, at the Royal Academy of the Dramatic Arts. He breaks first in the TV series Auf Wiedersehen Pat, which is an early 1980s drama, a comedy drama, I guess, about a group of construction workers from northern England who go to Germany. They originally go to Dusseldorf to get work, to find work. And it's about their camaraderie and their interconnected stories and them dealing with German culture. And it was a huge hit at the time. And he is very much the heart. He's like the bumbling heart of this group of guys. The series really is just a phenomenon, and he works consistently then through the 80s into the 90s. His filmography is huge and complicated. He's in Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies in 1996, which is the same year that he plays Rosencrantz in the Kenneth Branagh Hamlet, which is an extremely good performance. We saw him previously for a second in Vanilla Sky, of course. And the year after The Last Samurai, he's going to appear as Peter Pettigrew in Harry Potter. And that's going to some extent lock the rest of his career into versions of that performance. I think he's very good giving that performance, but you're right. It's not what I want from him, and it's not what I want, frankly, from anyone.
From cinema,
yeah, right? Spall is an enormous... He appears in Turner, the biography of the painter.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if you...
No, I didn't see it.
He's just very much that kind of British actor, right? He gives that sense of a fall from dignity, that he used to be somebody or that he could have been somebody and that now is just kind of schlubby and kind of disaffected, but also has like a sense of principle about him so often. I think he's a really interesting actor, and I think he's terrific in this film. Mm-hmm. You like what he's giving here as Simon Graham?
I do very much. I think he's lovely. It's funny because he starts with the voiceover and I couldn't place him. But then as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh my God, that was Timothy Spall doing the voiceover. Incredible.
Yeah, he's really giving like a very complex and authentic this is theater training, I'm sure, coming through. He's not just doing a flat, British affect. He's really giving a character.
A person, yeah.
And that's really lovely. When he's delivering the Japanese dialogue as we're trying to jailbreak Katsumoto in the end of the second act, beginning of the third act of the film, I think he's so good there. And is delivering this, gathering together the shreds of his dignity while also clearly terrified, while also being physically nudged forward by Tom Cruise. Like, I think he's really, really lovely here. The other actor that we should talk about is probably Billy Connolly, for all that we're not going to have to talk about him for very long. Yeah.
It's funny because I have a note here that says Billy Connolly is a treasure. And then my other note is, oh, Billy Connolly, gone too soon. But you, I am learning, have different thoughts about this. And I find them fascinating. So please share.
Very important that when I was growing up, Billy Connolly was basically the most famous and beloved person in all of Scotland. He was just a working class guy who had come, he was a construction worker. He was a welder before he ever first goes into music in like the early 1970s as like a frontman for a proto-punk kind of band, and then becomes the most successful Scottish stand-up comedian in history. He topped British TV's list of the 100 greatest stand-ups of all time, right? He topped that list in 2007, 2010, and in 2013.
I did not even know he did stand-up.
That's his thing. That is his whole thing. He is a stand-up comedian. He's incredibly profane on stage. He's kind of like a Scottish George Carlin.
Yeah,
right?
I can totally see
He has that same political edge. He has that same desire to shock with the power and the immediacy of language. Mm-hmm. He was a genuinely great stand-up. I think that's total. And I say was only because he has retired from doing stand-up comedy for a few years now. He's now mostly an artist, I guess. He's producing visual art.
That's cool.
A really interesting guy with whom I have two major problems. The first is we are of very different political ideologies. Mm-hmm. He is absolutely against Scottish independence and has spoken publicly and vociferously on Scotland remaining a part of the Union. And that's okay. We can have, considered political differences of opinion. That's absolutely fine. But he was also cast in The Battle of the Five Armies, the third of Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies, as Dion II Ironfoot. And not only does he suck in that film, not only is he the worst thing in the worst scene in the worst of those films, he also publicly delighted in talking smack about Professor Tolkien.
Can't have
describing Tolkien as unreadable. Being cast in this film and presumably paid some money, decided not to take the time to read the original book. His opinions on Tolkien are absolutely abhorrent, and therefore he is dead to me.
Okay.
Okay?
Fair.
Because politics, the future of my nation and homeland, that's one thing. But Tolkien... I also really am surprised by his undertaking of the Irish accent in this film, and then also surprised by how bad his Irish accent is in this film. Also, this character's name is Zebulon Gant.
Weird.
Zebulon Gant is an insane
Super
name
Irish
to give
name.
to a minor character.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
Yep.
All of the names in this film are kind of bad.
Yeah.
Nathan Algren lacks any kind of mellifluity, right?
Yeah.
It lacks any kind of euphony. It is
Yeah.
just an unpleasant collection of syllables, which is also an extremely hard collection of syllables for the mostly Asian cast to pronounce.
Absolutely.
And if that is the point, and if that is the joke, then get a better point. Make a
Yeah.
better joke.
Yeah.
It's weird. The only other actor that I wanted to call out very briefly is Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays Ujo in the movie, the samurai who doesn't like Tom Cruise but
Right.
teaches him to fight and then earns his respect, that dynamic.
Yeah.
He is in Speed Racer. He is the guy that Hawkeye assassinates in Avengers Endgame when he's being all
Interesting.
edgy and emo. But mostly we know him for playing Dogen in the last season of Lost, the guy in the temple.
Yeah.
That's that guy.
Okay.
Dude gives a lot of face.
Yeah. I
Lot
like him.
of face
Handsome
from
too.
that guy.
Mhm.
Really good looking dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was lovely to see him here giving basically the same performance.
Yeah.
But I like it. It's good.
I liked the young kid too.
That's Shin Koyamada, who plays Nobutada,
Yes.
Katsumoto's son. Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
I had an unfortunate association with him that made me not enjoy his performance
Oh,
so much,
no.
because he reminded me so much of the weird Orlando Bloom kid in Star Trek Picard. You remember how Star Trek Picard
Yes.
has a weird
Oh my
Vulcan
God.
sword guy?
Yes, I
and
do.
They look very similar.
Wow. I can see that throwing you out a bit. Yeah.
It really did.
Oh no.
But I think that he's lovely, and I
He is.
adore his death scene.
His
is
death scene was
so
really good.
incredibly powerful.
And especially because you knew it was coming. Like
Yeah.
as soon as he's the first one around the corner shooting people, I said out loud, kid's gonna get it. Because you just know what's gonna happen. But it was still I think that when you know that something's going to happen, but you still find it compelling and moving, then people have done something well.
You said earlier in this very episode that you didn't get the riding into battle, riding to your death, like facing these impossible odds thing, but that's exactly it. That for me is the dramatic tension there.
That one, but that was different in that when he initially went in to free the prisoner, to free his father, I suppose, he did not intend to die that day.
That's true.
It was a possibility,
Sure.
but it wasn't, that's the kind of riding to death I'm talking about. Like, we're going to go... I mean, when Cruz is talking about, or Algren is talking to Katsumoto about the 300 story that we mentioned earlier about the Spartans. And he's like, well, how many of them survived? And he's like, dead to the last man. And they like grin and high five about it. I'm like, this is not cool, you guys. Uncool.
Yeah, it's weird that he introduces the high five to pre-modern Japan.
Modern.
Yeah. The movie shoots almost entirely in New Zealand, of course.
I wondered.
Yes.
Damn.
There are interiors.
I wanted it to be Japan. I really did.
Yeah, it's just very difficult, and there's no production infrastructure there for Western companies to come in and
New
produce.
Zealand's fucking beautiful,
It
though.
is pretty
Maybe
stunning.
let's go.
We shoot a couple of exteriors in Japan, mostly so that they can say, oh, we also shot this in Japan.
Sure.
But I don't think that any actors were shot in Japan. It's literally just a
Dang.
couple of landscape shots. Otherwise, it's shot entirely in New Zealand. It employs...
What was the budget?
140 million. It's a
Okay.
pretty big budget,
Damn.
particularly for someone who's relatively untested, right?
Yeah.
For Zwick coming in to manage this film and being given that amount of money to do it, I think is very impressive. That's 140 million without any money going to Cruise. Once again, he decides to forego his salary and to take points on the back end. He makes, because of the vast success of this film, he makes an estimated $25 million
Hot.
off of this movie.
Okay.
But it's shot entirely in New Zealand. 400 New Zealand actors, 600 Japanese actors on the production. It shoots between October of 2002 and May 2003. And it is, very quietly, a very important film in the Tom Cruise canon, because this is the first film where they make a big deal about Tom Cruise performing all of his own stunts. This is the first time.
No kidding.
Yeah, he breaks the rules on Mission Impossible.
Right.
And tells the insurance company that his stunt guy is going to perform some of the stunts. And even then, he only performs some of them.
Right.
But this is the first time when Tom Cruise does all his own stunts, is a part of the marketing push of the film.
The choreography of all the fight sequences is really strong.
He studies Japanese swordsmanship and the Japanese language for 2 years in advance of this film. He became semi-fluent in Japanese as a result of training in that Tom Cruise way, right? He just commits to doing the impossible thing and then does it so much. So much that it kind of comes off as being a little, I don't know, theater kiddie, right?
Yeah,
it kind of comes off as being a little stagey like that. The cinematographer, who is crucially important, I think, to the success of
Every
this film.
frame of painting kept on coming to mind.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous.
This is John Toll, who won Academy Awards for his work on Legends of the Fall and, of course, most notably and familiarly for the battle sequences in Braveheart. He also shot Vanilla Sky for Cameron Crowe. He shoots half of Cloud Atlas and Jupiter Rising and Sense8 with the Wachowskis. He shoots the pilot of Breaking Bad for Vince Gilligan.
Damn.
And we'll see his work again later in this series because he is the one who shoots Tropic Thunder. Because they wanted someone who was a real cinematographer to shoot Tropic Thunder, not a comedy guy. They wanted a guy who would shoot it like a drama because that's where the funny is ostensibly. We'll talk about Tropic Thunder.
Okay.
When we get there. He also shoots Iron Man 3 for Shane Black, which is one of the most unique and interesting looking Marvel movies.
It certainly is.
A sleeper candidate for best Marvel movie is Iron Man 3, in my opinion. I really like what that film does. It's so self-aware, so early in the run of Marvel movies. It's wild. The music is, of course, by Hans Zimmer, who we've previously discussed for his work on Rain Man, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. He did the score for Days of Thunder. He did the score for Mission Impossible 2. Since then, he has really made his name, right? Because he did Gladiator, for which he was again nominated for an Academy Award. After this, he's going to score the Antoine Fuqua King Arthur movie that we mentioned earlier. Then in 2005, he's going to work with Nolan on Batman Begins. That's really going to set up the latter phase of his career. This is his 4th out of 5 Tom Cruise movies. We won't get to talk about him again until the first week of August when we cover Top Gun Maverick, believe it or not.
Okay.
This, The Last Samurai, is Hans Zimmer's 100th score.
Damn.
Since then, he has scored 83 other films, including just this year, Dune Part 2, Kung Fu Panda 4, and a movie that I swear I had never heard of, Mufasa the Lion King, a CGI prequel to the Jon Favreau CGI remake of the original animated film.
Whoa,
so the thing that you can say
so
about Hans Zimmer is that the guy will take a job when it is offered.
I guess so. Yeah. Probably has many lovely homes.
Yeah.
Wow.
As I said, the movie cost $140 million. Cruise chooses not to take that salary, but does make bank off of the international box office of $457 million worldwide, partly thanks to a phenomenal response in Japan, where it is the 7th most successful movie of all time. It is the 4th most successful English language movie of all time after Titanic and the first 2 Harry Potter films. It is in rarefied company in Japan.
Wow.
Yeah. It is still number 21 on the all-time Japanese box office charts.
You know, I'm really glad to hear that.
It was a phenomenon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes me feel pretty good about the movie in general. Because I always, whenever I'm watching a movie from however many years ago, I always get a sense of discomfort when we're dealing with like different people groups through an American lens that are exoticizing them in any way. I sometimes feel icky.
Yeah.
But
and you should almost always. Yeah.
Almost always, exactly.
And I think that there's some fair criticism about this film too.
I think so.
Yeah.
But to know that it was beloved of the Japanese people is beloved makes me relax a little bit into it.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
good. Yeah. And it does seem like, it's funny, I was talking with a regular at the bar about doing this movie back before I had actually watched it. And he was saying how pissed off everybody was at the time. It's like, who's making Tom Cruise the last samurai? And he's like, Tom Cruise was never the last samurai. It was Ken Watanabe. And I'm like, I know. You don't have to tell me.
I don't even think it's Ken Watanabe.
It's all of them. I agree. It's
samurai
it's
is plural as well as
plural.
singular.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, that's where I take it to be too. And if it is plural, I think you can enfold Tom Cruise into that structure to a certain degree. You can enfold Algren into that structure to a certain degree. Yeah, but we'll talk about it when we get to it. The film opens December 5th, 2003. It is number 1 at the box office. Number 2 is Honey, the Jessica Alba movie, like a dance movie, I think. I've never seen that film, but I sure recognize that DVD cover.
Yeah, sure.
Number 3 is the second week of The Haunted Mansion. Number 4 is the 5th week of Elf. Do you like Elf? Do you care for Elf?
Yeah, sure.
Number 5 is the 3rd week of a truly cursed film, the Mike Myers Cat in the Hat.
Oh,
one of the most abominable films ever created. Yeah.
Wow, I'd forgotten about that one.
Shockingly bad.
All of the live action Dr. Seuss stuff has got to stop.
It's just, please.
It's just upsetting.
Maybe all of the Dr. Seuss stuff has got to stop.
Aw.
Maybe we have
Maybe
it.
we're past that.
Maybe we just have
We
it.
did it all.
Maybe we did it all. Maybe in 50 years, someone can crack open a time capsule.
Sure.
And we can start making versions of those films again. But you know what we don't need to do? Is do it every single year.
Certainly
for
not.
sure.
Yeah.
From there, Love Actually is number 10 at the box office. The Matrix Revolutions is 12. The extended edition re-release of The Fellowship of the Ring debuts this week at number 17,
Damn.
taking another $500,000 despite only
Hot.
appearing on 126 screens
Hot.
across the country. The Last Samurai is domestically the 20th most successful film of the year, but worldwide, it is the 6th most successful, behind
Wow.
The Return of the King, my billion-dollar baby. The Return of the King, the only movie to make more than $1 billion that year. Finding Nemo at $871 million. The
Sure.
Matrix Reloaded at $739 million.
Weird. Okay.
Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl at
damn, people love that
$654
movie.
million. And Bruce Almighty, a genuinely very bad film, at $485 million. Bruce
Weird.
Almighty, a film
Bruce
that no one
Almighty.
remembers, and the sequel
Weird.
completely destroyed,
Yeah.
somehow made almost $500 million.
Weird.
This is a weird year at the movies.
Sounds
right?
like it. Yeah.
A really weird year.
Yeah. Strange.
And that's the production story of The Last Samurai. But perhaps what is more interesting than the production story of The Last Samurai is the cultural imprint, the legacy of The Last Samurai. Because I think that for most people, if you sat them down and said, I will give you $100 if you can write down the name of every single Tom Cruise movie, this would be the one that would get them. This would be very close to the bottom of the list in terms
People
of
remembering it.
the
just like
average
staying.
recall
Yeah.
of Cruise's filmography. I feel like this film has not left much of a mark, particularly on his career, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
feel as though it's remembered. Do you feel as though it's out there in the common perception of Tom Cruise as an actor?
No, probably not. But again, particularly like I knew a lot of people who loved this movie, so to me it was always on my radar. But
Sure.
you're probably right.
Is there anything else you want to say before we get into our exploration of the plot of The Last Samurai?
I don't think so. Just again, I want to say how blown away I was by the art direction, and I'm so glad that it was nominated for Academy Award because I thought it was just a stunning film visually. And I'm wondering who else got the noms and who won it that
Well,
year.
I'm sorry. I mean, it does absolutely deserve its nominations, I think. For art direction, it was nominated against Seabiscuit. Maybe that one doesn't need to be
okay.
there. I don't know. Master and Commander, the aforementioned Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
Also great.
Girl with the Pearl Earring. But of course, the winner for art direction is Return of the King because
that was the Return of the King
first
year.
two movies had been
Yeah.
so underserved by the Oscars.
Right.
That they came
That's fair.
back with a lot of awards, and the costume design, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same nominees and exactly the same winner, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to take that
It's
away
true.
from Return
It's
of
true.
the King.
Can't
but
take it away. That's all
yeah,
right.
yeah.
I concede.
Seabiscuit is really the only one I think that doesn't belong on that list. That's weird.
That is a little strange, but okay.
So with all that said, let's get into the movie. We open with this voiceover from Timothy Spall that you mentioned earlier, kind of giving us this great man theory of history, right? This idea that actually the world is transformed and changed by single individual men like my friend Tom, who's about to do miraculous things in the Japanese way. Like, this film, we kind of have to talk about it right now because of this opening voiceover, but this film is, I mean, I want to find a kinder term than politically incomprehensible, right?
Yeah.
Politically naive.
Politically
I think
naive
is maybe
for sure.
the best approach
Yeah.
to it.
It's drawing very strange comparisons.
Extremely strange comparisons. The most powerful of which is the comparison between the samurai and the Native American populations that Nathan Algren in particular had just slaughtered. Right?
Yes. Which he at least is completely aware of. Like he lives in shame
Yes.
for the massacres that he has done.
Yes. Which is an interesting character, right? That's a very modern take on that kind of post-Civil War hero used in the literary narrative sense, not in the virtuous sense, right? That kind of character. This is an interesting thing that we can do to interrogate how that character feels after the fact. But drawing any kind of comparison between the brutality displayed toward the indigenous populations here in the United States and the samurai culture in Japan is fundamentally flawed. These two things are nothing alike.
It's
They're
much
nothing
more
alike.
like the Civil War. It'd be much more like talking about.
Was a Japanese Civil War that was exactly that. Yes.
That's odd.
It's so
just,
strange.
yeah.
The idea of brother against brother is so much more specific and is so much more applicable that I'm amazed that we go with Custer rather than doing
Yeah,
a more
it's
interesting
strange.
deconstruction of where America was at that time in that place. Particularly as we're using Bagley as the counterpoint to Algren, right?
Right.
So we're really setting up this mirroring of personality and characteristic, right? And we're mirroring, of course, as we've said before, modernity and ancientry, right?
Right.
There is a real thematic contrast between those two things. But it's not explored with any kind of depth or subtlety.
No, instead I feel like they're trying to lean on that the noble savage trope. And a
little bit, for sure.
Yeah, it's just a strange
But that completely avoids dealing with, in the first sequence where we are presented to the upcoming, Imperial army. And it's these people who have been conscripted who are now being taught how to fight. This is not the subjugation of an indigenous peoples by a conquering colonial force. This is Japanese people against Japanese people.
Right.
It renders away, I think, with the exception of the one officer who calls the ceasefire right at the end of the movie, it renders away the Japanese-ness of the Imperial Army in a way that is kind of indefensible.
It feels it. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Also seems like a movie where the colonizer tells you why colonizing is bad and why you should feel bad about being colonized instead of shaking hands with your colonizer, which is always a weird political stance to take. Okay. It's not quite a white savior trope because he doesn't save anybody.
I mean, that is the accusation, is that it is borderline a white savior
Borderline,
trope.
for sure.
Certainly you have the idea that Cruz comes in and that he is just better at being a samurai than the samurai. Right?
Which I think is not true, but yes.
It's not completely true.
Yeah, better than some of them, perhaps.
He does pick up
among
every...
the top tier.
Yeah, he picks up how to be like this in 3 months, generously, maybe 4 months. It's a very brief introduction.
That's true.
It displays a natural capability from him, and he still gets to preserve all of the things that distinguish him from the Japanese people that he's surrounded by, right? He gets to preserve his diaries and his narrative of events. He's kind of taking authorship and ownership over what is happening here, even though it's not his story to tell. He's physically and literally telling that story.
Yeah.
And it's put appropriately enough in the service of these people, particularly in the service of Katsumoto. But I mean, again, it is naive, right? It is naive to lay this story out and expect everyone to be totally chill with it. Particularly, more than 10 years after Dances with Wolves.
Yeah.
10 years after The Last of the Mohicans. We're still telling basically exactly the same story. And we say this, of course, from the privileged position of 2024, where people are flocking to the movie theaters to see Dune. So maybe we're just never really going to resolve this. And maybe it's all about how you do it, not whether you should do it. From there, though, in those opening shots, we transition to Ken Watanabe and his visions of the Tiger Standard. And God, just amazingly cool.
Yeah,
and then,
just cool.
One of the details that I love the most of the film, such an understated title card.
Yes.
That very simple, very clean title card.
Yeah.
It feels so grown up. It feels so confident in what it's doing. And that, I think, maybe ties in to some of that political naivete, right? It doesn't stop to question itself because it is just so authoritative. It wants to present this confident version of its story. And that confidence is really admirable. And I think it makes the film work. And maybe you don't get to have that if you are also simultaneously interrogating your own political bias and your own political position. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah.
Does it strike you as a confident film?
Yes. Yes, I do think so. Yeah. And also, it seems like the film itself has just so much dignity that it is not concerned with what you might think of it, but rather has just invited you to witness it, which is interesting.
Right, that idea of an invitation. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, it's not distinct from Katsumoto's character either, right? This film is a good conversation.
Yeah, yes. He does really seem to me to feel like the star of the movie more than Cruz does.
The mechanics of, category definition at the Oscars are as inscrutable today as they have ever been. But I think you could... No, I don't think you can make an argument for Best Actor, unfortunately, just because
Probably
it is
not.
such a singular, Tom Cruise's face is on the poster. Those things do matter. But
It even went, I noticed at the end, credits, it went Tom Cruise, The Last Samurai, Ken Watanabe.
Yeah.
And I was like,
he has his sole name above the title there. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because of course those contracts would have been signed before Ken Watanabe had ever been tested in front of a camera speaking English, right?
Yeah.
You have to kind of negotiate that in real time as you're moving toward the production beginning. We're then introduced to the character of Cruz himself, this drunkard, this guy who is so haunted by the past that the only way that he can sleep is by knocking himself out with whiskey. He's also got this firebrand politicized ideology that he's bringing to the people that he's trying to sell rifles to, this showman aspect of it. I think this is great. I think it is really difficult to watch, but absolutely brilliant. Does it work for you?
Yeah, I would say so. It's not my favorite part of the film, and I'm glad that we dispense with it pretty quickly. But
we do dispense with it so quickly,
Yeah.
don't we? Because we're almost immediately, we get introduced to Billy Connolly, we go out into the street, and then we're immediately with Bagley and Omura, and the offer that he can't refuse is being made. Just a ton of money to come to Japan and to train their armies. This, I think, works really nicely. Bagley does not work for me at all. I think that if there is a bad performance in the film, I think it's his.
Yeah.
But also the character is just very
I think it's
underwritten.
Just boring. Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of there.
He's really predictable. And Omura too, to a certain extent, I think is also just kind of flatly villainous.
Yeah.
In a way that I would maybe want some more sophistication.
The performance is flat too, though. I think you're right. The only thing I like about him is that he's doing a good kind of like vaguely Southern thing.
Yeah.
The accent work.
The accent
is pretty
work
good, I think.
You're right. He's giving an entire like generation of American fighting man, right? He's giving that real sense, our filtered, Ken Burns sepia tinted sense of what the Civil War was. He's embodying that quite nicely.
Without doing something totally off the wall like your Knives Out guy.
Right. Yes, exactly.
When we had Daniel Craig doing Southern, you're like, do we need this?
But the problem with this flatness, we basically immediately wind up in Japan. We get the voiceover on the ship, which kind of introduces us to Algren more personally and more directly. And then we get Timothy Spall coming in to tell us, quote, the ancient and the modern are at war for the soul of Japan. And the problem is that because the modern, quote unquote, are just flatly villainous, we get no actual articulation of a conflict. We get no articulation of a vision. No vision for a modern Japan is presented, except for this weird half line that we get from the Emperor right at the end of the movie, which is, well, we should remember where we came from. I'm going to think about that. That's it. There's no further articulation for why Japan might be interested in becoming a modern nation at this. And of course, even those ideas, that idea of modernity at that time period, the idea of nationhood during that time period, still very complicated. But I wish that we'd had maybe someone who can articulate, this is better for everyone. This is better for everyone in Japan if this happens. We get modern healthcare, we get modern science, we get, power and everything that would benefit an entire culture.
Right.
And we don't get that because really it's just about Omura making much, much more money than everyone else.
Yeah.
Which, of course, was the reality, too. But still, if you're going to take this very simplified political posture in your film, then, give us the counterpoint, too, maybe. We meet very briefly with the Emperor, and I think Timothy Spall is great throughout this entire sequence, just kind of giving these little sotto voce instructions for how to behave. And back, and back, and back, and turn. It's so good.
It's good.
This is a bleakly humorless film. If there are more than 5 jokes in this movie, then I would be very surprised.
Yeah.
But I do like what Spall is doing to bring levity, and I love what Watanabe is doing to bring like a wry, sense of irony.
Yeah.
But also, that great sincerity together. I think that really works. Did you find this to be a funny film? Do you think it would benefit more from being, slightly funnier?
No, I think the balance is nice because I agree that Timothy Spall is giving levity, but he's not giving slapstick, which I do not want.
Oh,
not
thank
from
God
him
for
and not
that.
from anybody.
Yeah.
I agree that Ken Watanabe is so light on his feet and has such like a wink about him that it works for me. Yeah, I don't need more of that. I also like it's not funny necessarily, but I am reminded a little bit of Jerry Maguire and Ray when we get the kid Taka's youngest son.
Yeah.
Their relationship is really lovely and sweet too.
Both of those younger boys, what fantastic performances.
Yeah.
Just really, really remarkable, I think.
Yep.
From there, we cut away to the training sequence, the first training sequence, our introduction to what will be the Japanese Imperial Army. How does this work for you? Does this demonstration of Algren's confidence in the incapability of the man that he gives the rifle to?
I mean, he's evidently correct. And I like him just putting his money where his mouth is. And also he does have kind of a death wish. Like when he says, just kill me, you son of a bitch, or whatever it is that he says under his breath. Like if he does happen to get killed and die, that's not the worst thing that's going to happen. Like I feel like he's ready. evidently. He is ready to meet his own
Yes,
death,
for
as
sure.
he will. Not meet it, but welcome it at the
Yeah,
end of the film.
yeah.
So I was okay with it.
Yeah, I think there's something that's slightly misaligned here about the presentation of guns and modern weaponry.
Yeah.
That
Well, and also this poor nervous kid who's like, I can't just kill my commanding officer.
Yeah.
Like, I will be beheaded in the town square. Are you kidding?
No, and that's also like a great performance too.
Yeah.
I think in that moment, and obviously you can see the $140 million budget even in New Zealand. It stretches
Yeah.
so far because this is so elaborate a sequence with all of these guys, and we're not digitally inflating the number of guys on screen
Yeah.
here. This is like we actually just had all of these people. I think it's a really striking sequence.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about him standing there defiantly, demonstrating that the modern firearm is insufficient without the skill to use it, which is not the argument that is being made by the rest of the film. The argument that's being made by the rest of the film is that modern weaponry doesn't require skill. It doesn't
Right.
require
And that's
discipline.
what you
It doesn't require
see
dedication
at the end.
or
Yeah.
humility. It
Yeah.
requires the pulling of a trigger.
Yeah.
Right?
Reload, pull.
Exactly.
Reload,
The juxtaposition with the
pull. Yeah.
Gatling guns, which are so indiscriminate and so horrific in the closing moments of the film.
Yes.
I find that to be a much more interesting and sophisticated kind of thematic clash
Yeah.
than I do this poor untrained guy who's only been holding this weapon for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And is, as you're right, what Algren is articulating here is that this army is not ready to go into the field. Despite that, we go into the field.
Yep.
We get this mist-shrouded forest action sequence,
Mhm.
which is, I think, really good, very
Yeah.
atmospheric, very evocative.
Yep.
You've said before that you don't care for these battle sequences. How do you feel about the battle sequences specifically in this film?
I mean, the choreography is all really beautiful. It's not a battle sequence, but specifically when Algren takes on the 5 guys, whatever,
Yeah.
in the square,
Yeah.
is so gorgeous. I wish they didn't go back to it in slow-mo with blood splatter. We didn't need that.
We didn't.
Just do it the first time. It was
Yeah.
perfect. I don't have to go back. But
And
then,
we've already demonstrated that because he does basically the same scene here in the forest,
Yeah.
holding the banner.
It's so odd.
Yeah, it's a strange thing to recapitulate that and do it worse the second time.
Yeah. I don't understand who thought that was a good idea. That's
The other
an
thing
editing choice
that I
don't
have
get.
to talk about with regard to the way that this film depicts action is that we keep breaking the line of action. We keep breaking the 180-degree rule all the time. And it means that the action sequences are disorienting. It means that I find it very difficult to track where people are in relation to anyone else, which is not such a big deal here in the forest, right? Because we're fighting
Yeah.
in the mist and we don't really know what we're facing and we don't really have any strong sense of connection. Zeb dies here,
Yeah,
sadly.
yeah.
Thanks, Billy Connolly. We hope that you enjoy your paycheck from this movie. But later, for example, when the ninja attack the samurai village,
Right.
it is disorienting to the degree that I don't know what I'm supposed to be worried about. I don't know where anyone is or how we're supposed to connect. And that is just because, do you want to give a gloss of the line of action or shall I?
You go ahead, because this is one of the things that I always struggle with a little bit. I actually got it wrong on a test once.
It's kind of arbitrary is the thing.
Yeah.
It's just, it makes sense. It's not a rule in the sense that it's a law. It's
Right.
a rule in the sense that you need to do this in order for your films to be good.
Right.
And it's basically that, yes, when you depict any kind of action sequence, you draw an imaginary line across the set and you keep your camera on that side of the line so that if
Right.
someone is on the left during an initial dialogue scene, that person stays on the left throughout any action sequence that you are doing so that you can anchor your viewer in the spatial relationships between all of your various actors. And we just keep deliberately breaking that in this film, which again, we break deliberately.
Right.
This is not an accident. We're doing it on purpose to disorient the viewer, but maybe the viewer is too disoriented. And maybe if we had toned that down, we might have had a better sense of the scale of battle,
Yeah.
particularly, and really this first battle is exempt from that because of the mist, because of the confusion, because we don't really know what we're doing. I will cut ahead to the end here of this sequence and say that this is why I like Nathan Algren as a character, is because he does the thing that heroes do in films, which is he gets up.
Yeah.
And anytime you can have a guy who keeps getting up,
Yep.
my loyalty is going to be with that guy. I love guys that get up. See also my love of Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. Yep. Yep.
And we conclude the first act here with Algren being captured by Katsumoto because of the dream that he had of the tiger banner,
Yeah.
which he sees now, so vividly in the forest. I'm not crazy about anchoring the movement of this plot in a prophetic dream, particularly the kind of prophetic dream that we will not return to and that we don't really
Yeah.
care about. It's kind of an element of exoticization, an
It
element of the
is,
magical
it
other
is,
that I don't think we
yeah.
needed. But I am grateful that, a half hour into this film, we've done what we needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
We've done the thing that we knew was always going to happen.
Yep.
And we get to the village and we get to Algren's imprisonment through the long winter as he battles the demons of his alcoholism. Does this work?
Does this work?
Does this work? Sweaty, disheveled, unkempt Tom Cruise shouting sake. I don't know. 30 times, maybe 30 times.
I feel like I'm hearing that it does not work for you.
It feels a little flat. It feels a little obvious. It feels a little perfunctory. It feels as though we've just got to, burn the alcoholism out of this man's system, because that's how that works, right?
Yeah.
And then he just emerges stronger and better and clear-eyed, as though the alcoholism was the problem. And I suppose, in a way, the film does articulate this, right? The film does articulate that the alcoholism was preventing him from actually reckoning emotionally with what he had done. He was numbing himself through the whiskey. So we do kind of move through that, but it is perfunctory. Here is my big take on this film. Are you ready? I like this film a great deal. This film is going to go pretty high on our list. I think it's a good watch. I think it's a pretty good time. I think this film is the wrong length. I think that this film is 2 hours and 35 minutes, and I think it needs to be a half hour shorter or a half hour longer.
Yeah.
Because we do so many things that we don't have space to really explore, so we just do the flat, perfunctory version of it. See his entire relationship with Taka.
Yeah, I agree.
We do the steps of it, which the audience at home already knows because we've seen movies before.
Right.
We just do the obligatory things without any kind of flourish or depth or real examination or time.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you cut those things out and you make this like a tight 2 hours. I think you've got yourself a film. Which is
probably the way I would go.
But you can also go longer and delve into all of that and give us more real character. We do get little bits of that, right? His scenes with the little boy. Someone somewhere has figured out that in this period of his career, Tom Cruise can talk to kids.
Yeah.
And it works really well. I don't know. But making the time and the space so that we can do these things not just in the fastest, most A to B to C way possible, I think would really serve the film. And I think the shorter version would work. I would miss some of the stuff that we would inevitably lose.
Yeah.
I'd miss some of the cinematography that we would inevitably lose in a 2-hour edit of this film.
Definitely, yes.
I think my instinct might be, go longer. Go to 3 hours.
You never say that.
I never do.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a genuinely lovely film that, unlike most films that run 2.5 or 3 or 3.5 hours, this film genuinely feels constrained by its running time.
Yeah.
It feels as though it's constantly got an eye on its watch and just wants to or feels compelled to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So he gets captured and we burn out his alcoholism in this great winter's purging.
Yeah.
We get the short sequences with Ken Watanabe, but we're not really delving into that. We get his interactions with Ujao and the training with the wooden swords, which I think is so good, but it's also like literally it's a 3-beat. He loses, he wins. The last time he loses, he draws.
It's a draw.
Like, it's so obvious in its structure that I just wish we had more time.
Yeah.
But you're right. A thing that I never say. A thing that I have said about none of the other films in the Tom Cruise filmography, for sure. That's actually the next thing that happens. We get the first conversation with Katsumoto, which is, again, I cannot say enough good things about what is happening in this film as far as that goes. But then we get the great sequence where he's play fighting with the kids in the rain.
Yeah.
And Ujao is just beating him down. And every time he gets up, the music does that Hans Zimmer thing that it does. And it's really powerful. And a great sequence for being shot in the rain. It looks gorgeous.
Yeah, that sequence didn't work for me as much because, again, it's just the boy movie part of it where it's like, just maybe stop fighting now. Just maybe like, oh, well, it's a rainy day. Shake hands. This has been, you know what I mean? Like, what do you...
It's that defiance. I find Algren to be so interesting because it's that mix of, I am ready for death, but you try and kill me and I'm going to keep fighting.
Yeah.
I think that is such an interesting kind of way of analyzing who this character is beneath what he thinks that he is, right? It's a way of getting to like his essential nature in a way that I find really, really interesting. Because you're right. For all that he avowedly is ready to die, every time he's pushed to the brink, he fights back harder and harder and harder and does not give up and keeps getting up. He's pretty good. Like, I don't like Algren in most ways, but in that particular way, I like it a lot.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
From there, suddenly he's speaking a few words of hesitant Japanese during dinner.
I think this is lovely. That's among my favorite things. Him just deciding to pick up on the Japanese language and to use it to connect to people and not just to learn how to get out or plan an escape or whatever.
And the delight that we get from Nobutada.
Yes, from the kids. He's like, oh my God, he said rice.
It's really lovely. There's some interesting stuff. I couldn't pin down exactly what happened during it's not even the production process of this film, but like the post-release life of this film. At some point, they stopped burning the Japanese subtitles into the film when it was released on DVD and Blu-ray. So there are versions of this where you can watch it unless you go and turn on all the subtitles. You are not going to get the subtitled Japanese. It's just going to be presented to you in this opaque form, which I kind of love, I think.
Oh, that would drive me crazy. I wouldn't love that.
I think it's a way of anchoring you. See, this is the thing, is that the film is insufficiently in Algren's POV for that to really work.
If it's only during the scenes with Algren, that's okay. But then we have scenes like the scene on the bridge where we have...
And the Emperor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would not be cool.
Sure, sure. So let's talk Taka, I guess. She's very beautiful.
She is very beautiful. Yeah, she's quite lovely.
About it. There are those 2 sequences where she goes to Ken Watanabe and says, I want this man out of my house. This is disgusting. Get him out of my house.
Yeah.
And there's almost in those moments, characterization, there's almost something that is more complex. Again, if the film were longer, I would love to delve into her. I want to know more about her story, but we get instead the most obvious beats. And most of the most obvious beats collapse down to, but she's really pretty.
But she's real pretty. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
Is this your favorite sequence in the film? Everything from arriving at the village up to our midpoint, which is the ninja attack. And if you could make the midpoint of your film a ninja attack, I urge you to do so. Very important. It's really the only flaw with My Dinner with Andre, is that the midpoint is not.
I don't know, because I think if the movie was just that, I wouldn't be as enamored of it. Because I do, like, again, I'm not here for the huge battle scenes cinematically. But as a story, I find them very important.
Sure,
the life or death of it is part of, the whole experience of the film. Yeah. So yes, I like these quiet moments, but I like them in contrast to the battlefield.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I just love how rich and detailed and loving the cinematography is through the sequence in particular. I mean, the film looks great start to finish, really, but this is very, very beautiful. And I like seeing this performance from Cruise, honestly. This is the moment where he feels perhaps the least comfortable in a sense, but is the most open. Right? He's the least in charge of his surroundings, which I think is always an interesting thing to do to Cruise as a performer. And it's just gorgeous. It's just really good.
It's really beautiful and good. Yeah.
Then the ninja attack. How does that work for you?
I like it. Yeah. It's interesting. I love your point about breaking the line of 180, but I didn't notice. So I think that may be something that often happens to me in like big battle sequences and stuff, is that I kind of lose my sense of space, but that doesn't bother me because I imagine that's how it feels and that's how I'm being made to feel, at least somewhat purposefully. So I didn't notice.
This is the first moment for me where the battle sequence feels a little hyperbolic. It feels as though we are just killing a lot of people, and I don't know how many people live in this village up front.
Yeah.
But like, the film does not suggest that we kill fully half of the people who are living in this village during this midnight attack by the ninja. But that, I mean, categorically, that has to be what happens. By the number of people that we see die, the number of bodies we see on the floor, that has to be what happened. But we don't feel the weight of it. It doesn't feel significant enough for that to be true.
That's a good point.
And yeah, the other thing is that spatial disorientation, because I'm supposed to be watching Algren defend Katsumoto because that's an important character beat for him in this moment. And I just don't know where they are in relation to each other. I'm not sure through the last sequence here if they are in the same room in the building or whether or not they are in completely different spaces. And that's a little tricky to get through. But it's certainly striking. And the use of fire is so interesting, so profound. Yeah. Gorgeous, gorgeously constructed sets. From there, we do the absolutely obligatory farewell scene with Taka at the absolutely obligatory waterfall where she is bathing. Just a real, Last of the Mohicans, Pocahontas kind of move here.
Definitely.
And then we're back in Tokyo, and the mastery of the film is such that this feels weird and disorienting and too modern and too loud and too bustling. Yeah. And I don't think that it does that. It doesn't do that self-consciously. It's just a natural product of how loving we have been in the village and in our cinematography there. Yes. Do you like this depiction of then modern Tokyo? Do you like the depiction?
I do. Yeah. I'm surprised to hear that we're in New Zealand, but yeah, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. Algren sees Bagley and the new Imperial Army, and Bagley conspicuously introduces the Gatling guns. I'm sure they won't come back in the third act. Katsumoto meets with the Emperor in a wonderful, heart-rending, gorgeous. Okay. You and I did talk a little about this film before we sat down to record, and I think we both agree that maybe the Emperor is not a very good actor.
Yeah. I mean, this particular archetype I think is difficult to perform because you're being called upon to be, almost unhuman, to be like the divine, and to not make long eye contact, to not just meet another person where they are, because you're not where they are.
Yeah.
So that I think is difficult for anyone to perform anyway. But this kid particularly doesn't work for me until the last sequence, where he works very well.
This is Shichinitsuke Nakamura, who plays this role, who is chosen in part because he is a very famous and well-respected theatrical performer. He's a very famous kabuki performer as well. He is the son
also that
of
way.
a very famous kabuki performer.
All right.
And also looks a lot like the real emperor in this period. Like, there's some definite deliberate casting of a visual iconography here, which I find really interesting. Yeah, he is perhaps the weakest part of the cast for me, but I mean, Ken Watanabe's doing such heavy lifting in this scene that it's outstanding. The portrayal of this dignified man. And again, you do definitely have to strip all of the real life politics out of this in order to get to what makes the performance good, right? Because this is not a beleaguered people being oppressed by a colonialist force or proud and independent, traditionalists standing in the face of modernity. This is more like a defund the police argument that is happening right here. This is, you guys have all of this power and all of this wealth and all of this independence that you are not using in real life to actually serve the rest of the country. You are just interested in preserving your own privilege. That is the real life argument about the samurai at this point.
Interesting.
And it's not presented that way
at all.
in the film, which is fine because we wouldn't be sympathetic to that, right?
No.
I don't know how you would make a film of that if not like this. But if we attribute to him all of these other qualities and particularly this altruism, this generosity, right?
Yes.
Like his desire to care for people is so rich and so deep and so well represented. It's really very good. And then we get the clash with modernity as Amura demands that he remove his sword.
Yeah.
And he appeals to the emperor in that moment.
Yes.
I will remove it if the emperor commands me to remove it. And he doesn't, because he doesn't want to get his hands dirty in this little fight. In this squalid little affair. He can't be seen to pick sides, perhaps. And then he's arrested. And it's just lovely.
Yeah, it's true.
Then the rescue, which we mentioned earlier. Which
That's
I think
definitely
is
a high point.
I think so too.
Yeah.
A really, really great scene. For all that the archery is a little bit, the Two Towers. It's all just a little bit
but
Legolas-y.
I like that too.
No, sure, absolutely. And the rescue works out with Timothy Spall is so terrific, so fantastic with his camera there.
Yes.
And Tom Cruise choosing to subordinate himself to Graham in that moment, Algren, I should say, choosing to subordinate himself to Graham in that moment and prompting him and nudging him and telling him what to say as we move through the sequence is really very, very good.
Yep.
And Spall absolutely delivers. Just a great performance. The prison rescue, we should say, does take place after Algren is attacked in the street by the five men. And I know that the speed ramped recapitulation with extra gore of those individual shots is very bad. But I do think that is probably the best choreographed scene in the movie.
No, I can see why they wanted to give it to us twice, even though I think they ought not to have.
And he just keeps getting up. I love it. The only problem with the prison break sequence is that after Nobutada starts, he's mortally wounded, but he's on the bridge and he's firing his arrows, and then he draws his sword and he charges into the fray, buying his father and their companions time to escape.
And then Algren just keeps watching.
Just
and you're like,
stands
Algren,
there.
Run. This is what he's doing. He is giving his life for you now so that you can get away. And you're just standing there.
Just watching the whole thing unfold.
Just watching. Agree. Hard agree.
Cruise must have had something in his contract that not only will I not run in this film, but I'm going to move as little as possible in this film. That's why he's injured through most of the film. He's limping. That's what it is, I'm sure. So all of that takes us through the second act. It's a very deft second act, I think. First act establishes us in Japan, takes us up to the point where he is captured. The beginning of the second act is life in the village. The midpoint is the ninja attack. The back half of the second act is everything in Tokyo. And now here we are on the brink of the third act and all-out war. How are you feeling about the film at this point? Is this working for you? Is it winning you over? Do you feel the sense of dread that it's just going to be a fight scene for the next 40 minutes?
No, I don't, because it's very much grounded in these characters and in this friendship.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. I'm very interested, and I'm very emotionally compelled by the film. It really works for me on basically every level.
when we get into the white savior read of this film, I think that this upcoming scene, as much as I love it, is like the crux of that argument, because this is the scene where Katsumoto is basically ready to commit seppuku, to just give up, to take an honorable death in the face of overwhelming odds. And this is where Algren tells him about the Battle of Thermopylae. This is where he tells him about the 300. This is where he tells him about how sick Zack Snyder movies are going to be in the future. Just, you can't die now. You got to stick around. Speed ramping and desaturation. You're going to love it. Oh my God. Gerard Butler's not good in anything else. That adoption of the moral high ground, right? That adoption of this, like, I am more principled than you are, and I am going to communicate that principle to you, even though this is your world and your fight. Does that feel uncomfortable to you? Because it chafes a little for me, I have to say. It chafes a little for me that Algren is like presuming to tell this guy who has lived in this world his whole life and has a much greater sense of context.
Yeah.
He's presuming to tell him how a life is well lived under these circumstances.
I don't know. Yes and no. I don't feel it getting too white saviory. I feel that these two men are now actual friends, and it's just the way that they approach their lives and their deaths now. Like, I don't think that Katsumoto is the get back up, get back up, get back up kind. He's the fall down, fall on your sword kind.
Well, but
which
with
is
wisdom,
part of with wisdom. No,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. He knows when the fight is over in a way that Tom Cruise that Algren does not know when the fight is over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, my problem is then leading hundreds of other men to their death.
Sure. Under
this banner of honor. I don't love that, but I think that they both do it, and I don't put the blame on Algren.
No, and I mean, in a sense, that's what leadership is.
Well, yeah, and leading from the front and not the back,
exactly.
Which comes up a lot. We should talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. The marked difference between where Algren and Katsumoto are going to be during the battle versus where Bagley is going to be.
Exactly.
And Omura. And the Japanese Imperial Army captain who does not get a name in this film.
Who's terrific.
Who is so good and who has that moment of great grace and dignity as well, right at the end there. We'll move through all of that because first we've got to do the battle sequence. I guess first we've got to do the, hey, you're going into battle, you should wear my dead husband's clothes.
I mean, we saw it coming. I don't like it as something that's given to, I don't like the way that we make it romantic. I think we ought not to have made it romantic. It ought to be her finally giving forgiveness to him.
That's
and
such
him
a
finally forgiving himself.
You're absolutely right. If you strip away the romantic elements of that relationship and you just make it about forgiveness and respect.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. That's a really astute read. That kind of fixes the problem immediately, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. But of course it is compounded here because
she's so pretty.
Yeah. Well, and not only can you wear my dead husband's pants, but you can also kiss me now.
Yeah.
Right? Which is, maybe not great. But I do love the reaction shots that we get when he emerges from the house, dressed in the armor, which looks fantastic.
It really is an incredibly skillfully made costume.
I know. I'm a little dismissive of anything that isn't Return of the King as far as the Oscars craft categories go in this year. But this is second. Like, this is so very, very good, I think. Just across the board. All of the armor looks completely unique and distinct, but is also has this shared commonality. Like you can tell that it comes from the same place. It's really lovely. And when he walks out and Ujo gives him that look of like, you shouldn't be okay, all right, okay.
Well, I think that we expect him to say, how dare you? But instead, when he comes up to make sure that it's secured right and fitting well, that's a nice moment.
It is.
It's good.
It's really lovely. And so from there, we're into the battle sequence that's going to occupy most of the rest of this film, I guess. We have the lining up first on the field of battle. We get the samurai arrayed against the Imperial Army, and then we get the opening up with the howitzers and the bloody carnage of modern warfare applied against a pre-modern civilization here. This is tough to watch, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, really ugly. It's interesting because initially we have Algren telling Katsumoto that we need to lead the enemy into close quarters where we don't have to use our guns. Yeah. So then when you see them all line up, you're like, what the hell are you doing? Did you just say not to do this?
This is the opposite of what you said. Yes.
So then that's a nice bit of sleight of hand where we see the fireballs put to good use, which is pretty damn cool. Like, the fireballs are
extremely cool,
right?
Yeah. But also
harrowing. Yeah. Like just burning hundreds of men alive. Like, holy smokes.
Well, even in these first movements, I think we get the understanding that, we're going to try and lure the Imperial Army into close quarters so that we have the advantage, but that is going to involve the death of dozens and dozens and dozens of our people. Like, it's not a clean trick. It's
No.
not something that's going to escape violence and bloodshed. It's something that is actually going to just
initially
level
cause
the
more.
playing field.
Yeah.
It's really tough. But yes, that faked retreat with the burning of the barricade so that they can't be pursued by cavalry is very strong.
Yeah.
Lures the army closer, and then we ambush them, and it's bloody. It's really striking. I think the cinematography throughout, again, for all of my complaints about a high level kind of obscurity of what is happening, like insufficient information about the scale of the battlefield at large, I think the individual shots and the individual pieces of fight choreography are really quite beautiful. And you just can't fake 500 people in a battlefield, right? You just can't fake this level of depth and detail.
Yeah, I would agree. I always am really impressed by the animal wranglers when I see all horses in battlefields and so many like rearing up and taking falls. It's always... I don't know.
It's funny because after we do the ambush here and we basically regroup, right? The Imperial army is withdrawn. They lose this engagement and come back to their battle lines. And then we have the samurai marshaling on their cavalry, knowing that this is going to be a suicidal charge, that this is all that they have left. And it's suddenly very far and away. It's suddenly the land run sequence.
Yes.
It was a weird bit of synchronicity across 11 years of Hollywood, I guess. Just a strange similarity.
It's true. I thought that too.
So we break the cavalry charge through the line. The artillery, of course, is raging. It's just awful. Algren kills Bagley, but then the Gatling guns open up, and it's carnage.
It really is. And you do kind of feel the difference between like what honor there might have been in warfare, dubious though that may be, to modern day warfare, which is just so removed and so bloody from such a distance. Like there's something...
Yeah, maybe that's the distinction that it wants to make. I was talking earlier about the power of the modern rifle as a symbol, as a symbol of violence and of military power. But we're drawing the distinction here not between pre-rifle weapons and rifle weapons, right? We're not talking about firearms. We're talking about the distinction between the individuated firearm in the shape of the rifle and this machine, this robotic creature that is just capable of mowing down hundreds of people. It's and I can see why we make that distinction too, because it puts Algren on the right side of history, right? It puts him on like the good guy side vis-a-vis what kinds of weapons. Well, no, exactly. Right. That's it. Gray. Is that as soon as you scratch the surface, you're well, what are we saying in this really, beautifully shot, but maybe ultimately a little hollow film? But maybe that's true of all of these historical epics. Maybe that's what you get. Right? I've never done comprehensive political reading of Gladiator, but I'm pretty confident that it wouldn't be, very profound. I'm pretty confident that it would be as insubstantial perhaps as this movie is. But then we get the actual moral, if not political application of this technology, because this is where the Imperial captain orders the ceasefire. He's appalled at what is happening just on a human level and orders the ceasefire, which creates space for Katsumoto to take his own life with Algren's help. Algren, who now understands what it is to choose the moment of your death. And
who still doesn't want Katsumoto to go through with it because he is his friend and he will miss him. I'll miss our conversations.
It's a lump in the throat. Lump in the throat from that moment, which is so good. And the cherry blossom flies and Katsumoto takes his own life and everyone kneels.
Yes.
On both sides. It is an incredibly powerful moment.
Do you feel that the kneeling is for Katsumoto or for Algren or for both?
I feel that it is for something greater than that. I feel that it is for Katsumoto, but it is for the passing of the samurai, right? It is for this way of life is now done. And
I think that's why it works.
May have a legacy, but it is not going to be present anymore. And we'll really kind of codify that with Algren taking the sword to the emperor. I was going to say in a little while, but actually it's basically next.
It's basically next,
because we hard cut out from there too. Yeah, the conclusion of the treaty negotiations in the palace, and just this turn by the emperor, which is very morally satisfying.
Yes.
But maybe not terribly well motivated.
Yeah, I would completely agree.
Delivers the sword in a really great and humble performance by Cruz. I think he really gives a lovely dimensionality to what Algren is feeling at this moment, and just wants the emperor to remember what was as he moves into what is. And the emperor clearly has this change of heart, in effect, which empowers him or makes him feel empowered to strip Omura of all of his money and lands and redistribute it among the poor. I get the symbol of that. I get the imagery of that. I don't know what that actually does.
Yeah, especially with just this one guy. Yeah.
Yeah. That feels like a tyrannical reach for power that is only going to make things worse in Japan, right? The story of that, all the other oligarchs start side-eyeing each other at that point.
Right.
You're like, did you hear what he did? Just because he wanted to, just to prove a point, just because Tom Cruise asked him to. Again, politically naive. But for all of that, a very powerful moment. And then the resolution of that scene where he asks Olgren how Katsumoto died.
Yes.
That's it, right? Sometimes all that you can leave is the legend. All that you can leave is the impression. All that you can leave is the legacy. It's really quite lovely. And then we come out from there to Timothy Spall just glossing the future, I guess. And everything's going to be complicated, but probably fine. And Olgren disappears into the pages of history.
Yeah, but I like to think.
I like to think. He goes, and so much so do I like to think, and I'm going to show it happening to you.
Yeah,
Which is, I could have maybe lived without that. Yeah, honestly, I think that because, of course, there's no doubt in the audience's mind that that's what we're going to do. So the ambiguity of the voiceover is in conflict with nothing, really. Yeah. But it doesn't really matter, I suppose, because I suppose what we're doing is we're leaning into this idea of authorship, right? We're leaning into the idea that Olgren has written the history of this conflict in a sense.
Right. But then it's actually told by Graham. Yes.
Yeah. And with a great deal, I think, of restraint, we just quietly move into the credits and it's really lovely.
It is. I completely agree.
This is a pretty great film.
Yeah. And while they show Olgren walking through the village, leading his horse through this, idyllic space, we don't see him, kissing Taka against a sunset horizon. And I really appreciate
Absolutely not. Yeah. Yes. It's not a joyous ending.
No.
Like the only thing that we can hope for Olgren here is that he has returned to peace, that he has through everything. He really does have a profound character arc. And it is a character arc that is kind of parasitically tapping the power of a culture that is not your own, right? But maybe that is just more of a structural problem in the sense that if we hadn't already seen Dances with Wolves and we hadn't already seen Last of the Mohicans, that maybe this film wouldn't have that, I don't know, context surrounding it. It wouldn't feel as though this is just the thing that you do. It would maybe feel like it has a little more internal integrity. And maybe if we look at just this film, it actually possesses some measure of that integrity.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Before we get to putting this on the big list, though, there's one other topic that we really have to address, and that is how hot is Tom Cruise in this film? This
is important to you.
Is this the first bearded... Well, okay, cards on the table. Yes, it's important to me because I think that this is the hottest version of this kind of Cruise that we ever get. This is the hottest long-haired Cruise that we've ever gotten, and I think it's because the beard works. It's not
I do think the beard works.
A great beard, which is fantastic.
Yeah. It does work, though.
But it's strong. I think this is a really strong look for him. And
yeah, I would agree.
Generally speaking, I think we like his boyishness and his modernity a little more than we like this kind of presentation of Cruise. But I think if he's going to have long hair, he should look like this because this is the hottest version.
Cool. All right. Interesting.
So with all that said, where do we put this movie on our big list? If we wrap up all of those criticisms and all of those compliments, if we balance the Ken Watanabe with this political naivete, if we balance what I think is a genuinely great and overlooked Tom Cruise performance with this idea of like the structure of the film falling exactly between two stools, that it could stand to be longer or shorter, but where it is perhaps incomplete or at least feels a little obligatory in its second act. Where would you put this on the big list?
I'm thinking that this is going to be a serious contender for our top 5. So right now we have at number 1, Jerry Maguire, number 2, Top Gun. Those are pretty untouchable, I think.
Sure.
Then the first Mission Impossible. And then A Few Good Men, which we're talking A Few Good Men territory here, I think. And then Magnolia.
I think we're somewhere in this area. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right?
I think is A Few Good Men just a more polished and ambitious kind of story for all that it is equally politically naive, for all that it has the same kind of narrative conquering real world history that A Few Good Men has here to some degree?
I think that the production design and cinematography, the art direction of Last Samurai, to me, puts it above A Few Good Men. It's just more of a cinematic masterpiece than A Few Good Men is.
I think that is fair. I think the virtue of A Few Good Men is not in its cinematography.
Right.
I think that's absolutely fair, and not really in its production design either. Yeah, okay. Well, that
But certainly if I
gets
had the
us-
chance to see one of these two in theaters, it was playing this weekend,
Sure.
I would want to see Samurai, I think. I
Okay.
don't think I would want to see A Few Good Men
What?
in the same
Certainly not
way.
in the movie theater.
Yeah, which is maybe not a helpful distinction, but
Well, what if just across the corridor they were playing Mission Impossible? Brian De Palma's 1996 Mission Impossible, which we've said before is not our favorite Mission Impossible film. Nowhere near, in fact, our favorite Mission Impossible film.
yeah, it's, this is closer to that than A Few Good Men, I think, for the reasons that I said. Just like it's
Sure.
more of a movie,
It has, I think, maybe more to say about the human condition. I think it is a more universal film than Mission Impossible. Mission
think that's
Impossible
true.
is this, tight little puzzle box that works pretty well, but is perhaps a little more flashy than it is substantive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But also, The Last Samurai is also not very substantial.
No, I mean, it really is. It's Ken Watanabe that's elevating this picture, I think, as well as the art direction are both just making it something that is very special, I think.
And as good as the supporting cast is
Yeah.
in Mission Impossible, no one is giving anything like Ken Watanabe is giving here.
No.
Though, I mean, if we're going to talk about iconicity, we definitely have to talk about how iconic Ethan Hunt is as a Tom Cruise character
I know.
versus how vanishingly irrelevant Nathan Algren is as a Tom Cruise character in terms of his ongoing filmography. This film has not left the impression that Mission Impossible has left, certainly.
That's very true.
And I feel like we do measure that on our big list. So maybe number 4 between Mission Impossible and A Few Good Men, it goes in as an overlooked gem, right? I think that's maybe
I'm comfortable with that.
a good spot for it to
I
go.
do think you're right. I think that iconicity has definitely had a lot of weight for our decisions up until this moment, so
Yeah.
it should continue to.
Well, all right then. There it goes. The new number 4 on the list.
I love that. That
late
feels right.
swing there for The Last Samurai. A really great film. And if you're somehow listening to this without having seen it, go see it. It's really, because so much of the pleasure of the film is in the tiny details too. I know that we just moved through the entire plot, but let's be honest. You knew the entire plot from looking at the poster.
Right. Yeah.
That is not what this film is about. It's not going to shock and surprise you, but it is going to delight you in its minutia in a way that I think exceeds basically any film on this list besides Jerry Maguire. Like Jerry Maguire also is a movie that you can see coming from a mile off, but it delights in its execution. I think The Last Samurai is very similar.
Yeah, I would agree.
In that regard, and that is going to do it. A quick announcement about our upcoming Patreon bonus episode, because you guys remain just willfully unpredictable. We had assumed because of early voting that for our April bonus episode, we were going to be talking about Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall, a movie which, the cards on the table, we were very excited to talk about in the bonus episode. But no, a late swing has brought victory to Paul Thomas Anderson and Boogie Nights.
That's wild.
A movie
Yeah.
which, coincidentally, we just watched a couple of
just
nights ago
watched,
because
just
we
to
weren't
watch it.
going to talk about it on the polls. So we will be talking about Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights in the upcoming Patreon exclusive bonus episode of The Last Star in Hollywood, a film that is replete with a number of really great and complex and chewy performances, and also Mark Wahlberg is there. It's an interesting film. We're going to have a lot to talk about for
Definitely
sure.
so.
And if you are
Yeah.
interested in hearing that, if you're interested in hearing any of our bonus episodes, head on over to patreon.com/nextword, which will not yet have been rebranded by the time that you hear this episode, but the
But
rebranding
we're working
is
on it. We're working on it.
Finalizing the logo that we should have had months ago when we started this whole endeavor, but we started before we were ready.
That's
And
what
now
they say
here
to
we
do.
are. That's what they say to do. I wouldn't change a thing. So the new branding for the Patreon page is coming, but you can head over to patreon.com/nextword today. Sign up, pledge your support. $5 a month gets you access to all of our many and varied bonus episodes. And we would like to thank our $8 per month superstar patrons for supporting us here.
Yes, thank you so much to Leslie Skipa, to Louise in Dallas, to Megan Lauder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, Self on a Shelf, Jolene Stark, and Chris Dawns. We cannot overstate how much your support means to us and how thrilling it is every time we get the little bling that tells us we have a new patron. So thank you all so much for your support. It's really exciting.
The best part of our day.
It is.
Like, it's just so
Absolutely.
great. Yeah. You guys are wonderful. And we remain very grateful. Next week on the show, we are going to take a hard pivot because we are going to be looking at Cruise's highest profile villain role, maybe in his entire filmography. He goes extremely dark in Michael Mann's hitman movie, Collateral.
Interested.
Yeah, a very different kind of movie
Yeah.
than Zwick's very comfortable Last Samurai.
This is a movie I think I see a lot of stills for
It's a
in
very
film
striking
school.
looking
Yeah,
film.
yeah.
Cruz with that like bleached out hair. He's also like prosthetically aged just a little bit. It's a really interesting look for him. And
Okay.
I believe, in fact, that when Cruz gets his passport renewed as he is shooting Collateral, the image on his passport, the photo that he gets taken for his passport, is him in full makeup for Collateral. That is a
so
story
weird.
that people tell about this film.
Surely that can't be true.
He looks weird as hell.
Okay.
And we're going to have a great time talking about
All right, I'm looking forward to
a
it.
more challenging movie. Yeah, absolutely. So that'll be next week on The Last Star in Hollywood. Until then, thank you so much for listening.
We'll see you next time.